Here's Reinman in the Morning, on demand from 102.1 and 105.3, The Shark.
My guest is a columnist for the Boston Globe, the recipient of the Baseball Writers of America Association Career Excellence Award, and the author of the wonderful book, Wish It Lasted Forever, Life with the Larry Bird Celtics. Welcome to Reinman in the Morning, Dan Shaughnessy. Mr. Shaughnessy, how's it going?
Very nice to be here. I'm good. How are you?
I'm great. It's an honor to speak with you. But before we talk sports, you're one of my favorite writers of all time, and you came up with one of my favorite expressions, which I use to this day. You once referred to someone as a, quote, sack of inner tubes. How did you come up with the expression sack of inner tubes, which I just love?
I think that this goes back, I'm so old, I'm pretty sure it's All in the Family, the Norman Lear sitcom with Carol O'Connor and Sally Struthers and Rob Reiner. I think that Archie Bunker referred to his son-in-law, the meathead, as a sack of inner. I think there was Gloria was married to Mike, and she was flirting with somebody at work or something who was a really handsome guy, and Archie said, "You know, meathead, this guy she works with makes you look like a sack of inner tubes." And I'm pretty sure that's so. I'm gonna assign that one to Norman Lear from like 50 years ago.
Who was it that you referred to, if you don't mind my asking?
That could have been anybody. I mean, over the years, we've used sack of doorknobs, sack of inner tubes. Sack is a good word in general.
Yeah, definitely. You wrote a column the other day about this terrible championship drought we're having here in New England.
Yeah.
Well, let me ask you this. Who do you think is going to be the team to break this slump?
Well, I mean, we were so close with the Celtics and Bruins this spring, and you had the greatest regular hockey season of all time. But it feels like that window kind of closed on them a little bit. We don't know if Bergeron's going to be back. Krejci's going to be back, and some guy, Marchand's getting long in the tooth, and some of those guys. So it feels like that window passed a little bit, and that sport is, the playoffs are so hit or miss with their sport. The Celtics, you would have to say, I mean, they were well positioned and still are because they have the same. It's a young core. So I think you'd have to say them out of the four at this point. It never seems to work out the way we think, but I'd say Celtics. Okay.
Well, it's a crucial offseason for them, and you spent a lot of time around the great Red Auerbach. So what do you think Red would do with this Celtics team this summer?
That's interesting. Red would love Marcus Smart, which is not what everybody wants to hear, but he liked guys that do as many things as he does. Red would also really discourage the late game, shots by Smart. It'd be like, Marcus, there's a reason you're open at the end. They want you to do it. So how I would plan against us, I would try to get the ball in your hands because we have better guys. But I think he would try to clean that up, but he loves Marcus Smart, so I don't think he'd trade him. I don't think he'd want to pay Brown and Tatum the same way, the same time. So not to mention, Tatum presents as somewhat anti-Semitic in my view, and I've not seen anything to shoot that down when
Brown.
you give him opportunities.
Brown. Okay.
Yes, if I said Smart, I take that back. Yeah, Jaylen Brown, he's been given opportunities to kind of renounce, the Kanye thing and all this, and he won't do it, and he's never really expressed a love to be in Boston. And I just think the numbers to pay, it's hard to keep up with the times, and Red really couldn't relate to that, I suppose. But having all that payroll on those two guys, I'm not sure. But he loved talent, and you have talent. They just have a duplication of skill sets there, I think, and the positionless basketball and the 6'6", 6'7", 6'8" swing guys, and everybody standing on the perimeter. It's the NBA today, yeah. But Red would like the way Jokic plays a lot more than the way his guys play.
Well, say they move on from Jaylen Brown, which seems to be a realistic possibility. Who would you look to get back for him in a trade, possibly?
Boy, that's wide open. And of course, they just the kid in Washington, Beal, came off the market. Looks like just now. Going to Phoenix for another super team over there. Mm-hmm. I don't have the answer for that. I mean, Lillard is a better fit, I think, for them. They don't really have a true point guard, and I'd hold on to Derek White for sure. I think he's been a guy that can. He's a little bit different from what the other people there do. Doesn't need the ball quite as much, but they've got to create minutes for him. They've just they've kind of got good problems in that too many good players, too many minutes, this and that, but a lot of duplication of skills, like I said, and you can't turn that thing over to a 34-year-old inexperienced coach the way they did. They put themselves in a box there too. So they've addressed that by bringing in some of the veteran, Sam Cassell and veteran coach presence and help for Joe Mazzulla. But a lot of strangeness to their year, starting with the way Ime was let go and leading right up to losing Game 7 at home the way they did.
Yeah, and when I look at, you talk about the duplicating skills, when I look at Brown and Tatum, it kind of reminds me a little bit of the early days of Golden State when you had Monta Ellis and Steph Curry, and both good shooters, good guards, but it was like one was a much better version than the other. And so I was kind of waiting to see this postseason. Are they going to show us what everyone talks about, the quote Jordan Pippen thing? But it kind of is what you talked about. It's just guys pulling up for threes, right? Doing kind of the same thing.
Yeah, and really, I mean, I know they still have a lot of ball left in them, but they've got 6 and 7 years respectively in the league, and should be better by now in those situations. They've lost 12 home games in the playoffs in 2 years. That's crazy. I don't know what that's about. And Brown to have 8 turnovers in that Game 7, and just when they really needed him to step up because Tatum got hurt at the start of the game and all this, just I don't know, something missing with Brown, and he's never really shown me that he loves it here, and that's a hard decision to make because everybody wants talent.
Well, even before the series against the Heat, I think it's fair to say that at times you've been somewhat critical of Jason Tatum. What would you like to see differently from him as a Celtic?
I just don't think we're ever going to see, we know the ceiling's high and the upside, and he's just got to do better in big games. And I mean, he was short in the fourth quarter of all those Miami games. I just don't get it. He's sort of a strange guy, and nothing evil about him or nefarious or whatever, but it should be better. It feels like he really can't work with this, but the things that are important to him don't seem to be the things that were important to, Bill Russell and Sam Jones and Bird and McHale and those guys. It's just, and this is today's athlete, the AAU Warriors, and the way they're raised and wanting to be MVP of the All-Star game. I mean, who gives a crap about that?
Yeah.
But the max contracts and the respect and the fact that none of these guys, they don't understand why we don't like Kyrie. Like they don't see it. They're all hugging Kyrie. Why would someone throw a water bottle at Kyrie?
Yeah.
We want to be like him. So I think that's problematic.
My favorite extension of Kyrie's trouble he's given us is that I have a 6-year-old daughter, and when I take her to the garden, they always take the caps away from the bottles now. And I finally asked him, I said, why do you guys do this? And it's because someone threw a bottle at Kyrie.
That's funny.
So then I had to explain to her, okay, so there's this guy Kyrie. Well, no, I can't tell you everything he's talked about, but yeah. You wrote this excellent book, Wish It Lasted Forever, about covering the Celtics in the 80s. And you talk about this in the book. It was tricky for a while because at one point you did a lot of hard work on something that went on with Larry Bird, and you uncovered an important thing, but you kind of ran afoul of him, right, at one point?
Yes.
Was this much different back then? Nowadays everyone's always trying to get the big, the quote, clickbait, if they will. This was a genuine story. How did it feel at the time to have the most famous athlete in Boston just not talking to you when you're trying to do your job?
Well, I'm used to been down that path with David Ortiz and Clemens and others since, but in that moment it was tough because I was the beat guy and I liked him and he liked me, and it was a very joyous time to be covering a team in our town because that was a very joyous team. But that, Larry got in a barroom fight during the playoffs in '85, and his percentage went down, and his hand was messed up, and it took 2 months to get the whole thing to come out. And when it did, I called him. I said, I'm going to have to do this. And he said, well, I'm not talking to you. And, he admitted, he was embarrassed when it came out, and there was out-of-court settlements, and it was bad. It did affect things. And I didn't like doing it, but it needed to be done. It took the whole next season, really, to get off that. And I understood. But there were ways to cover the team. I didn't enjoy it, but it was important, and the facts had to get out, and they did get out, and it was, like I said, out of court settlements. He at one time apologized to the Worcester Reporter. It's in the book, Mary Shane, because he was embarrassed for his mom, and he cleaned up after that. He stopped being in the wrong place, stopped having goons around him, and just cleaned it up a little bit. And I think in his life curve, I think it was a learning experience for him. We all do dumb things when we're young.
Sure. This was such a lively team. The 80s Celtics, I always maintain, the funniest sports team ever. Like when I see those documentaries, they're just genuinely could all be real comedians. But it was in an era long before social media. If Twitter existed in the 80s, which of those Celtics do you think would have been on there kind of like making the news?
That's a really good question, and I think that Larry would have been pretty exposed early on, I think, because Rick Roby clearly would have, they wouldn't have wanted that kind of scrutiny, people with cell phone cameras and late night stuff and all that. And they were, it was just kind of, frat house boys and this and that. There was not a lot of problems with police dockets. He really didn't have that.
Yeah.
So that was good. And because they weren't those kinds of infractions, but still stuff looks bad on social media, but nobody's waving guns around in nightclubs or anything like that. So I think that one of the things that it sounds to me like you've gleaned from that and the way they were unusually secure in their own abilities and their own greatness, which is what brought out the best in that team. And we don't see it as much today. There's jealousies and who's making the most money, who's got the supermax, who's leading the league in assists, who's getting first two-team all NBA, whatever. There wasn't much of that. They all had been so accomplished in their own worlds, and they rooted for each other sincerely. And it wasn't about playing time or minutes or credit. They knew Larry was going to get more credit, but they figured it out. Robert Parrish knew he was going to not get as many touches, but he also knew he was going to be a champion, and he was going to have a really long career, and he was going to get the ball in spots to dunk all the time.
Yep.
So if you worked for that, you were rewarded, and they rooted for each other. Dennis Johnson, he was a great teammate, and he could guard the other team's best guy, Magic or Tony, whatever. But Larry would just always compliment him, best teammate I ever had. And Dennis got his props there and got his rings, and all the badness of being in Seattle and Phoenix and being called a cancer by other coaches, that all went away in Boston because he had great teammates who knew how good he was and how to get the most out of him. So I like that about that team, and it made for a lot more fun.
Well, I just like to, whenever there's like Embiid and people like that going after people on Twitter or Draymond, I like to imagine if McHale and Lambeer each had Twitter accounts. Just like what that would have been. I would have gone on all summer probably, right? Between those guys?
Absolutely. Oh, my God, those guys. Yeah, they would have thought that was a silly medium. They'd just come out and say it. Larry just say, I hate Bill Lambier, and you'd kind of go from there. Yeah.
Speaking of things that people are kind of hating right now, and not without a reason, Boston Red Sox. Dan, do you see any path to success there, or should we just turn Fenway Park into like a Spirit Halloween store at this point?
Well, as we speak, I'm feeling better about them because I was there yesterday, and they swept the Yanks in a doubleheader, and they've won 4 in a row, and they're only a game and a half from getting out of last place, and I don't know, 3 or 4 out of the wild card, and the pitching is coming around a little bit. They got Kluber out of the rotation. They know they're going without Sale now, but Bayo looks like a top end guy if he stays healthy. And Paxton he might be a trade chip or something, but he's finally getting some production out of him. Bullpen's been on a lot of unknown guys doing better. I think it's the illusion of contention. They're not going to catch Tampa or Baltimore, or not going to seriously contend, but they're good enough where I don't think they'll be hopelessly out of it and be big time sellers at the deadline. They have enough, but they also could finish in last place for the 3rd time in 4 years and 6th time in 12 years. So. That's very real. It's a very tenuous thing. You always remember the last thing you saw. Last thing I saw was pretty good. And they're going on the road to Minnesota and Chicago. See how that holds up. But when it's bad there. The defense gets very shaky. It's a dysfunctional roster, people playing out of position, and they tend to all go in slumps at the same time. So it's very uneven. It's not a product that Boston fans deserve because they don't have the star power that you deserve. You got a GM who's trying to drive down the payroll at ownership's mandate, and a lot of dumpster diving and bringing in 4A players, and that lineup on a daily basis just has 3 or 4 guys that you wouldn't think would be Boston Red Sox.
Well, what do you think? Do you think anything happened there behind the scenes for the team to go from having consistently one of the highest payrolls trying to win every year to all of a sudden just dropping all the salary? It just seems so peculiar.
2019, man. I mean, they won it all in 18, going away, and in 19, I think they had 84 wins, and they felt it was flat. They were angry about being a top 3 payroll team and paying luxury tax, and they showed their hand. They had a press conference after they fired Dombrowski late in September and said, there are teams out there spending half as much money as us that are in the playoffs. And I said, there it is. Yeah. And that's what they're not going to do anymore. So they'll spend half as much and try to make the playoffs, which is what you're seeing on a yearly basis. Spend half as much, and get in there for that last wild card, which is the illusion of contention, which is one of the 6 out of 15. And we can win 84 and fool people into thinking we're still about winning when they're really not, in my view.
Last question for you, because I know you have a lot to cover. There's the NBA draft this week, as we talked about the Red Sox. But I want to ask you about something that you do that I love, and the Daily Mile. Are you still keeping up with the Daily Mile every day?
Yeah, it's pathetic. We try to be hiding out in my neighborhood. Everybody's little kids are making fun of me, and people in strollers are blasting by me. But I jog 1 mile a day every day since January 1st, 1983.
Yeah.
So we're into year 41 here, and very few misses. There's been a couple misses, broken bone here or there, and a kidney stone, blah blah blah. But pretty much. I think there was one 13-year streak. We didn't miss any. But yeah, all but a handful of days for 40 years, but it's really slow. It's embarrassingly slow. And so if you're if you're walking and you blast by me, don't make fun of me. If you're in a baby, carrying a baby stroller or something, just please try not to mock me when you go past me, because that's just me keeping the streak going.
My thanks again to Dan Shaughnessy. You can read him every day in the Boston Globe, and check out his book, Wish It Lasted Forever: Life with the Larry Bird Celtics. And you know something? If you can't go for the Daily Mile like Dan does every day, and you need some other way to get around, you could always do like Lenny Clarke did and just steal a bus. Yeah, that's a true thing he did once upon a time. And I got to ask him about it backstage at Comics Come Home this past November.
Lenny Clarke.
John.
Is it true? I heard you once, when you were running for mayor of Boston, you took a city bus and drove it down the street.
Yeah, trackless trolley in Harvard Square. And then he said I couldn't get it started for 50. And then he said, I'll give you another 100 if you can get it out of in between the two buses. I ran it back. He said, I'll give you 200 if you go in the tunnel in Harvard Square.
So on a bet, you did all this.
Yeah,
you took a bus.
Yeah.
Did you keep picking people up, making the stops?
I picked up a couple elderly people, but then a police chase ensued. So I had to pull it up on the sidewalk and block Mass Ave, and I went to a party at the high school football team, 200 witnesses, and they all said it was there, and the cops go, Lenny, we know you did it.
I know.
I've been here all night.
Well, then you're the best person to ask, since you've actually done public transit.
Yeah.
How do you fix the MBTA? How do you fix the Orange Line? What's Lenny Clarke's solution to all the subway delays we've been having?
More buses, constant trains, round-the-clock trains. Just keep them moving. Everyone, pay your fare, get on, let's go. That's it.
Last question, I'll make it easy. Thanksgiving's coming up. What are you thankful for, Lenny Clarke?
I'm thankful I'm still alive, and I'm thankful to the Mass General Hospital and two great doctors, Dr. Mansour and Dr. Lamalia. These guys have kept me alive over the past 18 months. Plus, Dr. Ruskin, he's the heart guy. Oh, my God, I love that guy. I love the whole hospital. They've been so good to me, and that's why I continue to work and raising money for that hospital, because it's the best hospital in the world.
Yep.
I'm living proof. I'm a miracle of modern science.
We're glad to still have you with us.
Thanks, John.
Thank you so much. Great to see you. Come on sometime.
You can see Lenny at Giggles on Route 1 in Saugus, and make sure you go to the Shark app and read about the Boston Garden Monkey, a wonderful mini doc that Lenny narrated. It's a crazy story. You're going to love it if you love the old garden. Thanks for listening.